Welcome to the future.
Welcome to 1337, the future of podcast of longevity. I'm Max, your host, always excited to explore the science of living longer.
And I'm Sophia, here to dive deep into health hacks and those ageless living tips we all crave. Together, we're on a mission to unlock the secrets to a vibrant and extended life.
And this time, you've brought us something really fascinating, something that hits close to home for so many of us. Mental well-being. You shared articles and transcripts around the ketogenic diet, but what really caught my eye was its potential impact on the brain, especially the insights from Dr. Georgia Ede, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist specializing in nutritional and metabolic psychiatry.
Exactly, and that's the heart of it for you, the learner. We're tackling this question head-on. Can the ketogenic diet actually be a key player in our mental health? We want to get past the buzzwords and the jargon, and find those clear, actionable takeaways and those aha moments that make you see the connections in a whole new light.
So let's break it down. We're diving into Dr. Ede's perspective on this powerful link between what we eat and how our brains function. We'll look at the science behind keto, those amazing results from a study on treatment-resistant mental illness, and even explore its potential for broader brain health and conditions like ADHD.
One of the things that really stands out here is this whole idea of metabolic psychiatry. Dr. Ede talks about her work as understanding how food directly affects the brain's metabolism and, in turn, our mental well-being.
It's a pretty new field, right?
Right.
I mean, she mentioned that metabolic psychiatry, a term coined by Dr. Shabani Sethi at Stanford, is super recent, like even newer than nutritional psychiatry. What are the key differences there?
That's a great question. Nutritional psychiatry looks at how diet affects mental health in a broad sense. Metabolic psychiatry goes deeper, focusing on the specific metabolic pathways in the brain. So it's really looking at the core energy processes and how things like brain inflammation, oxidative stress, that imbalance between those damaging free radicals and our protective antioxidants. And then insulin resistance, which is surprisingly common these days.
You're right. Dr. Ede mentioned that insulin resistance affects over 90% of Americans. That's a huge number. It really puts things into perspective and highlights why this metabolic angle could be so important. So most people think of the ketogenic diet as a weight loss thing, but Dr. Ede's perspective suggests it goes way beyond that, especially when it comes to the brain.
Absolutely. The ketogenic diet basically rewires how our brains get their fuel. Instead of running mainly on glucose from carbohydrates, the body switches to burning fat, producing ketones as an alternate energy source.
So in this lower insulin, lower carbohydrate state, our brain cells can work better and maybe even heal over time. It's amazing how the ketogenic diet isn't some new fad. Dr. Ede pointed out that it was actually developed way back in 1921 to manage seizures in children with epilepsy. She even called it a fasting mimicking diet. What does that mean exactly? Does it trigger those same cellular repair pathways or reduce inflammation like actual fasting does?
Precisely. Shifting the body into ketosis seems to activate those beneficial pathways we see in fasting. Less inflammation, better cellular resilience, things like that. Those early studies on kids with severe seizures? They were pretty remarkable. Over 50% saw a reduction in seizure frequency, and 10 to 20% became completely seizure-free. It really shows how powerful it can be for brain activity.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. So how does this ketogenic shift actually work on the brain? What's happening at a biological level?
Well, Dr. Ede explained that it directly targets those root causes we talked about. It's super effective at reducing inflammation, fighting oxidative stress, and improving insulin sensitivity in the brain. Plus, it helps rebalance those crucial neurotransmitters, those brain chemicals, serotonin, which is often linked to mood, dopamine, which plays a role in motivation and reward. The ketogenic diet helps stabilize these and others like norepinephrine, GABA, and glutamate.
It's like fine-tuning the brain's communication system.
Exactly. Providing a more stable and efficient energy supply for those brain cells. Dr. Ede suggests that these underlying metabolic issues can manifest in a lot of ways, both physically and mentally, depending on our genes and other individual factors.
Makes sense. It's like tackling the root of the problem instead of just masking the symptoms. Dr. Ede's personal journey into this field is quite fascinating, too. It wasn't purely academic in the beginning, was it?
No, not at all. She actually went through a period of declining health in her early 40s. Chronic fatigue, IBS, anxiety, depression, All of that, despite following what she thought was healthy eating advice at the time.
So that was her turning point, her aha moment.
Absolutely. She started experimenting with her diet and discovered that a way of eating that was, in her words, backwards from what we're told is healthy, actually resolved all her symptoms. And this was a diet that was mostly meat, low in carbs and fiber, low in cholesterol, and higher in fat. And this experience is really what fueled her years of in-depth research into nutrition.
Wow, that's a powerful story. It just shows how important it is to listen to our own bodies and question things sometimes. So based on her research, what are those core principles of brain-healthy nutrition she talks about?
She emphasizes three main principles: nourish, protect, and energize. Nourish means giving the brain all the essential nutrients it needs through whole, unprocessed foods. And she specifically mentions that this often requires including some animal-based foods.
That's interesting. What about the protect principle?
Protect is about actively removing things that can harm the brain by causing inflammation and oxidative stress. She specifically calls out refined carbohydrates and industrial vegetable oils as major culprits in the standard Western diet. It's not just about adding superfoods, it's about taking away the harmful stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about energize?
Energize is all about keeping those glucose and insulin levels stable and healthy. And for people who already have some degree of metabolic damage, a ketogenic diet might be necessary to achieve that consistent energy supply for the brain.
It sounds like those are the general guidelines, but she also stresses that a personalized approach is key, right?
Absolutely. These principles apply to everyone. But things like our tolerance to different foods, our current metabolic health, age, activity levels, any existing health conditions, our goals, and food sensitivities. All of that means we need a personalized approach. Understanding your own metabolic personalization, especially your carb tolerance based on your insulin resistance, is a really important first step. And the health of our gut microbiome and how well our immune system is functioning play a role too.
For someone listening, how do they start to figure out their own metabolic personalization? Are there any early signs they should look out for?
That's a really good question. It can be complex, but some early signs of insulin resistance might be things like increased hunger and cravings, especially for sugary foods, fatigue after meals, difficulty losing weight, even skin tags, believe it or not. But it's best to talk to a healthcare professional who can properly assess those metabolic markers.
Got it. Building on these principles, it's fascinating to see how they work in clinical settings. Like that study we mentioned on treatment-resistant mental illness. These were patients who hadn't found relief through standard psychiatric treatments, right?
Right. We're talking about Dr. Albert Donna's research in France. It involved 31 inpatients struggling with conditions like treatment-resistant bipolar disorder, major depression, or schizophrenia.
And the treatment was a very controlled ketogenic diet.
Yes, a mildly ketogenic whole foods diet under strict medical supervision in a hospital setting.
And the results were quite impressive.
They really were. 43% of these patients achieved clinical remission, which is amazing, and 64% were able to leave the hospital on less psychiatric medication. Plus, everyone showed improvements in their metabolic health markers.
That's incredible, especially for people who hadn't responded to traditional treatments. But the supervised hospital setting is a key factor here, right?
Absolutely. It was super important for safety and managing their medications. You know, the ketogenic diet can affect blood sugar and blood pressure pretty quickly, so close monitoring and potential medication adjustments were essential.
That's a great point for anyone thinking about making a big dietary change, especially if they're on medication. Now, let's dig into how this all works. How does keto lead to these metabolic changes, specifically with ketones and insulin?
Sure. So the main goal of a ketogenic diet is to lower insulin levels significantly. Dr. Eid calls it reaching the fat-burning threshold. This signals the liver to start making ketones from stored fat. These ketones can then cross the blood-brain barrier and act as an alternative energy source for the brain, potentially addressing those energy deficits we often see in neurological and psychiatric conditions.
Dr. Eid did mention other ways to lower insulin, like intermittent fasting, exercise, and calorie restriction. So what makes keto different?
Well, those other methods are great for metabolic health, but Dr. Eid points out that a well-formulated ketogenic diet offers a sustainable way to maintain lower insulin and ketosis over the long term. You can't fast forever, exercise at super high intensity constantly, or severely restrict your calories long term. But a balanced ketogenic diet can be a sustainable way of eating for a lot of people.
That makes sense. Sustainability is crucial. She does acknowledge that sticking to a ketogenic diet in our world, surrounded by high-carb temptations, can be tough. Environmental cues, social pressure, and even sugar addiction are real challenges.
You're right. But she also points out that many people who adopt a ketogenic diet find it easier to maintain in the long run. It can really stabilize those appetite hormones and energy levels, which helps curb cravings for unhealthy foods. She even describes being in ketosis as wearing a suit of armor against temptation.
I love that analogy. What about the initial adjustment period that keto flu people talk about?
Oh yeah, that. Well, Dr. Eid says those temporary symptoms like fatigue, headaches, and nausea can often be minimized by making sure you get enough electrolytes, things like sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and by transitioning gradually instead of going cold turkey.
Makes sense. There are so many misconceptions about keto. Can you clear up some of the common ones?
Of course. Dr. Eid stresses that keto isn't about following a rigid list of keto-approved foods. It's about understanding what raises and lowers insulin. And you know what? Ketosis can be achieved with all kinds of dietary patterns: vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, even carnivore. The key is minimizing those insulin-spiking foods, mostly refined carbs and sugars.
And fat, which used to be the dietary villain, is actually a key player in keto, right?
Yeah. Dr. Eid actually describes dietary fat as the most metabolically quiet macronutrient, meaning it barely affects insulin release compared to carbs. This is what helps the body switch to burning fat for fuel.
So is achieving ketosis like an on-off switch or more of a spectrum?
It's more like a defined range. Nutritional ketosis, according to Dr. Eid, is typically when you have a blood ketone level of 0.5 millimolar or higher. This can be measured with a blood ketone meter. To get there, you need lower glucose, lower insulin, and depleted glycogen stores in the liver.
And she believes that even just incorporating periods of ketosis could be beneficial.
Yes, that's her perspective. Periodically shifting into ketosis could support overall metabolic health, promote cellular repair, and contribute to long-term well-being for many people.
Very interesting. Let's talk about the potential link between the ketogenic diet and neurodivergent conditions like ADHD.
Okay, so dedicated large-scale studies on keto for ADHD are still pretty new. Dr. Eid mentioned some ongoing research at Oxford and Michigan that's starting in 2025. But there's a strong rationale for potential benefits because there's a link between ADHD and poor metabolic health. We see higher rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes, both associated with insulin resistance, in people with ADHD.
And there was some interesting older research from Europe that looked at how dietary changes affected ADHD symptoms.
Yeah, she highlighted studies from the 80s and 90s that used few foods diets or oligoantigenic diets. They basically limited the foods to things like chicken, lamb, some fruits and veggies, those considered less likely to trigger sensitivities. And those studies showed some pretty amazing response rates in kids with ADHD.
Really? What kind of response rates?
Well, 62 to 82% saw significant improvement, and in some cases, up to 70% achieved remission within weeks of making those dietary changes.
Wow, that's huge. But major health organizations haven't really embraced dietary changes as a standard treatment for ADHD, have they?
Not yet. Dr. Eid acknowledges that. She says we need more solid, large-scale evidence. But she makes a good point about the potential for dietary changes to be a relatively low-risk option compared to meds, which can have side effects. While meds can work for a lot of people, they don't always address the underlying metabolic factors that might be contributing to ADHD.
True. And she reminds us that ADHD exists on a spectrum and affects everyone differently. We also talked about the carnivore diet, which falls under the umbrella of different dietary approaches. Dr. Eid had some interesting things to say about its nutritional completeness and the role of fiber.
Yeah, she explained that, in theory, a well-planned carnivore diet can give us all the essential nutrients we need, something no single plant-based food can do. And on the topic of fiber, she explained that it isn't technically an essential nutrient and that its role in lowering those glucose spikes is less important on a low-carb diet.
Right. She also addressed that whole idea of fiber sweeping toxins from the colon. She said there's not much scientific backing for that specific claim and that the colon is pretty good at taking care of itself. And butyrate, the short-chain fatty acid often linked to fiber and gut health. She said that can be produced through ketogenic metabolism even without eating fiber.
It seems like we might be rethinking the traditional role of fiber.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Dr. Eid did acknowledge that we don't have a lot of long-term data on strict carnivore diets, though.
That's true. She emphasized that long-term data, spanning decades, is lacking for pretty much any very restrictive diet. But she promotes what she calls nutritionally pro-choice, advocating for personalized approaches based on our unique needs and responses.
That makes sense. Shifting back to keto for weight loss specifically, what are the main principles at play there?
The key principle is that when insulin levels are high, our bodies can't burn stored fat effectively. So lowering insulin, whether through keto or other means, is crucial for accessing and using those fat reserves for energy. Having ketones in the bloodstream is a sign that we're burning fat.
And she mentioned that without ketosis, the brain might not even recognize stored fat as a readily available fuel source, which could explain those persistent hunger pangs and carb cravings.
Right. And it takes a while for our bodies to get good at using fat as their primary fuel, but once they do, many people experience more stable energy and fewer cravings.
That's promising. So if someone is on keto, regularly checking their ketone levels is a good way to confirm if they're in ketosis and adjust their diet accordingly.
Definitely. Blood ketone meters provide that objective feedback so people can tweak their carb intake and stay in their desired range. Dr. Eid also mentioned those continuous glucose monitors, which are now available over the counter. They're great for understanding how different foods and lifestyle factors affect glucose levels. And since ketone levels are basically a mirror image of insulin levels, and we don't have easy at-home insulin tests, monitoring ketones gives us a good look into our fat-burning status.
Having that kind of real-time data must be empowering for people making dietary changes. Now, Dr. Eid also has a background in psychotherapy. How does that play into her approach?
She stresses that understanding the often complex relationship people have with food is crucial for making lasting dietary changes. Personal history, cultural influences, emotional connections to food, potential food addictions, all of that plays a role. She actually does a very in-depth initial interview with her patients to get a grasp of their individual context and challenges.
So it's not just about the biology of food, but the psychology of eating too.
Exactly. She believes in a team approach to support people on a ketogenic diet for mental health. This might include a keto-savvy dietitian, a therapist who specializes in nutrition, the prescribing doctor, and maybe a health coach for ongoing support. She also mentioned that around week 3 is a turning point for a lot of people adjusting to keto.
That holistic approach seems essential. Lastly, let's touch on keto and anxiety, a benefit she mentioned.
A lot of people report feeling less anxious pretty soon after starting keto, sometimes within days or weeks. It's likely connected to the stabilization of blood sugar, reduced insulin spikes, and balanced stress hormones. You know, when we're constantly making poor food choices, it stresses our bodies and messes with our cortisol levels, which has long-term effects on brain health.
And the research seems to be backing up these anecdotal reports.
It is. A 2023 systematic review highlighted the potential benefits of low-carb ketogenic diets for improving mood and reducing anxiety. And a 2024 pilot study from Stanford suggested that keto might help stabilize brain function and improve energy, sleep, mood, and overall quality of life in people with serious mental illnesses. Of course, more research is always needed, but it's exciting.
Dr. Georgia Eid's insights offer a truly compelling perspective on the link between diet and mental well-being. This whole idea of metabolic psychiatry and the ketogenic approach is fascinating. For many of you, the learner, exploring nutritional strategies could lead to some pretty amazing improvements in areas you might not have even connected to your diet before. The potential for those Bodhya moments is huge, especially when you consider the study on treatment-resistant conditions and the emerging research on neurodivergence.
Don't forget, Dr. Eid emphasizes the importance of personalization and those fundamental principles. Nourish, protect, and energize your brain. This deep dive gives you a lot to think about, especially when it comes to using diet to enhance mental and overall health.
For more information and to explore Dr. Eid's work in detail, visit 1337podcast.com.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Strength and honor. I am Spartacus.
Thanks for watching. Tap into 1337podcast.com.